Chip, Hilbert, you heard a little bit of what Mark said. Chip, we saw the chairman this morning really acknowledging the loss of lives among our service members. So our thoughts and prayers go with their families and their loved ones. Where do you think we are today in this campaign, Chip?
That's right. So CENTCOM acknowledged that they found the bodies of the 6 airmen who were lost in the tanker crash over Western Iraq. Also, the French government publicly acknowledged that they lost a soldier as well. In terms of the objectives that General Kane outlined, I mean, I think it's been a really impressive first 13 days of the military campaign. Thousands of targets struck. Estimates that I've seen indicate that Iran's ballistic missile launchers have been degraded, 80 up going on 90% at this point, taking out command and control facilities, hammering their navy, as Admiral Montgomery was indicating. But a couple things haven't happened, and I think they're worth acknowledging, and that is the regime hasn't collapsed yet. I think there's been acknowledgement this morning that perhaps Supreme Leader Khamenei may be severely wounded but still alive. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime has designated his son as the appointed successor, perhaps temporarily. And the populace in Iran hasn't yet risen up to overthrow the government. Perhaps that's yet to come, but so far we haven't seen widespread protests around the country yet. The regime's ability, as the Admiral was indicating, to attack shipping and their neighbors has been pretty severe over the last couple of days. They've struck 16 vessels across the Persian Gulf, attacked oil and gas infrastructure, resulting in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which is having ripple effects across the region and across the global economy.
What's your take on this?
Yeah, I guess, I would like to take it in a slightly different direction. We spent a lot of time here at CSP looking at how the future character of warfare is evolving. So I've been sort of trying to keep track of some of the first we're seeing in this campaign, which I think is characterized by incredible speed, intensity, and new technologies. So let me just tick through some here. So use of one-way drones on the part of the U.S. military. That's clearly a first. Use of PRISM, which is Army's new long-range missile strike capability that has now been used in combat. Active participation by other combatant commands. We had Indo-PACOM submarine sinking an Iranian ship off the coast of Sri Lanka. We had European command assisting with the defense of Turkey. So 3 geographical combatant commands working seamlessly in addition to the functional commands, which are STRATCOM, Cybercom, and SpaceCom. Chairman Kane today mentioned the use of artillery to sink Iranian ships, including a submarine, which is quite significant. But I would also really foot stomp the use of AI, which is, I think, what is really supercharging this campaign. If you look at the numbers and when you put them in the historical context, it's just incredible, the sheer scope and size of this campaign. In the first day, U.S. struck over 1,000 targets in Iran. If you look at the Russian campaign against Ukraine, they averaged, I think, about 160 targets during the first day. 13 days in, U.S. is over 6,000 targets struck in Iran. The entire war against Yugoslavia, which was 78 days, resulted in about a little over 900 targets struck. So just the size, the scope, the scale, the intensity, the pace of this conflict, I think it's just unprecedented. And I think for those who were doubting the U.S. military's ability to project power across long distances and in high-intensity tempos, I think should really rethink their assumptions.
Incredible, truly incredible. Martin?
Yeah, more of a question, and maybe, Chip, you would be the best person to ask. So I'm intrigued by this dynastic handoff of power under fire, and it seemed to be engineered largely by the IRGC. So what does that mean for the future of the Islamic Republic, right? It wasn't designed for this type of power transfer.
Well, you're referring to Mojtaba Khamenei, who's the son of the Supreme Leader. He has long been identified as a potential successor to the Supreme Leader, has been a candidate in a kind of quiet rivalry with some of the other leaders in Iran to sort of jockey for succession. I think what this clearly indicates, however, is the regime is digging in. The regime is not changing its nature or its character. It doesn't give signs that it's going to capitulate or give in as a result of the campaign. So I think that's the bottom line message. Now, his ability to remain in power and to drive events beyond the conclusion of this conflict, whenever that arises, is not clear. I think there's still a lot to be decided when we see what's resulted from this conflict.
Martin, I think we have a question online. I think the question is really, there's been a lot of, I think, discussion how Ukraine can help support the Gulf countries in this effort. So is there a way that this will be sort of like a net loss for Ukraine as they try to ramp up like support for Gulf countries, because they have to maintain their front, their war against Russia? So how do you guys view this whole like balance that we have now, which is like we have to surge obviously in support of Gulf allies and partners, but on the other hand, Ukraine is in the middle of a major conflict with Russia.
I think in the short term, it's sort of a net negative for Ukraine for a couple of reasons. One is the United States is rapidly depleting its stock of interceptor missiles and other munitions, so they're not going to be available for provisioning Ukraine for its defense. The other is the price of oil, right? So last I checked, Brent crude was at $99 per barrel, which is up from around 70 prior to the conflict. The United States just announced yesterday it was easing sanctions on Russian oil sales. So Russia is going to be acquiring more financial resources as a result of this, which will improve their position in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine.
I think, in my view, operationally, the two campaigns are not necessarily in conflict or not competing for some of the same resources. The Ukrainians, I think, have mastered the game of countering Iranian Shahid drones, and Ukrainians are now offering that assistance to the Gulf nations. I think they've sent delegations to at least 3 countries. Ukrainians, what they appear to need more are Patriot missiles, air defense systems that can help their defenses against cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. So I think as the U.S. military removes the ballistic missile threat off the CENTCOM theater, the threat going forward remains the Shaheeds, and that's where Ukrainians can help. And that, I think, they have high-density assets in place. And then we could shift the resources to the Ukrainian theater to help them with their missile defenses. So I think there's complementarity between the two theaters.
Yeah, I would add on this whole issue of Russia benefiting short-term. I don't think, a couple of billions of dollars will help Russians really ramp up, which is like a completely degraded economy from the war. Like it might help them maybe for a couple of weeks, but I think in the long term, I think, I think Scott Besson said this is only like 30-day, I think, waiver for oil that is already at sea. And so I think Russia's position has not been something to envy in the last couple of months. I mean, if you look around, Bashar al-Assad gone from Syria, Maduro gone from Venezuela, and now you have the Iranian regime really completely in tatters, probably, like for the lack of a better word. Like I don't know what else to say, but like I think yes, it's difficult maybe for Ukrainians right now to understand that Russia might got some relief from us in terms of oil sale, but I don't think this will help us much. Russia. I think another thing to watch, Martin, would be this like the president's. Trump and Xi Jinping summit later this month in China.
Exactly.
And how this really leads up to that. I think, this campaign has, as we all discussed over and over again, has been a military success, the pace, speed, and scale, and all those things. And I think it's something that if I was in Beijing and Moscow, I would really watch carefully how we can do these kind of operations. At the same time, like Gilbert said, we just had the operation against Maduro a couple of weeks ago. And now I think our forces surged in the Middle East to do this campaign in the Middle East. So, but over to you guys for any thoughts.
Yeah, well, in Ukraine, I think also by providing assistance to the Gulf countries and to the United States, they can position themselves for a quid pro quo, right? And ask for additional assistance from the United States, for example, in their war against Russia. So perhaps for the long term, Ukraine may actually come out ahead, net.
Chip, anything you want to add?
No.
For me, I think the one striking and perhaps disappointing aspect of it is just looking at the information environment. I mean, there's so much disinformation around this campaign, and there's so much, I think, almost willing perpetuation of Iranian regime narratives in online and skepticism around the campaign. So I think in that aspect, I think the U.S. is lagging. I think the U.S. could do much better in the information environment. I think the Iranians are probably benefiting from Russian bots and troll farms and other things to amplify their message. But it's a stark difference, I think, between what you read in public media and what the metrics from the war suggest.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think this whole issue of strategic confidence that we seem to have it's like a diminished return over time because we expect all these things to be solved overnight, that the military campaign will deliver fast. I think just benefits actors that use our open information space to propagate against our efforts and our objectives. So I'm with you there. I just think we have to be more confident in our goals, in our objectives. Obviously, our military has demonstrated time and again that they can do these things. So I agree with you there. We still are open to all the disinfo campaigns that anybody can launch against our country.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, again, we saw this in the opening stages of the Russia-Ukraine war, right? The information space is a key battleground, and to your point, we're not doing enough on that front. Yeah. And that narrative, that perspective that not just Americans have, but people around the world, that makes a lot of difference into how an operation like this is ultimately conducted.
Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.